Okay, I think we're going to get started. Sorry, this microphone is a
Yeah.
little loud. Okay, so I'd like to welcome you all and thank you for blowing in tonight. But what we were most worried about when we planned this was actually snow. Luckily, it's not snowing, it's just lots of wind. So I'm Joan Peterson, co-leader of We the People, Cloquet Area Indivisible. My co-leader is Jan Salo Corby, and this is her brainchild. Happy for Osterholm with us this evening. Jan sent Dr. Osterholm an email inviting him to come in person. And he was nice enough to have a Zoom call with the two of us, which was very nice, very friendly. He told us that he barely has time to take a vacation or spend time at his family cabin on the Gunflint Trail. And it was just going to be too hard for him to get in his car and drive up here and go back. And so we are very lucky to have him with us on Zoom tonight. Yes.
Hey.
So our Indivisible group is described to you in your program, and we urge you to join us if you live in our area covering Cloquet, Esco, Carlton, Moose Lake, Renshaw, Brookston, and the surrounding areas. We are almost 800 strong. Our purpose is to educate, support, and act. Tonight, we are doing all three, and we hope you will come away better educated, feel supported, and willing to take some action. Many thanks to our local healthcare panelists who are listed in your program, and they will introduce themselves as they ask their questions. They agreed to be part of this discussion, which was, it didn't take us too much time to get them to agree. I think they were just excited to be here, being able to interact with Dr. Osterholm. And thank you to all of the volunteers. You can see them with their name tags. Many people volunteered to help with this event, and there's been a lot of effort by a lot of people, a lot of time put in to put on this event. And we thank you to the sponsoring organizations also listed in your program, and to the Cloquet School Board and community schools for making it possible to meet here on a Sunday. The high school musical has practice every other night of the week. So this Monday was the only night that was available. And even kids are benefiting from this evening, as one of our members, Beth Kirsting Peterson, a retired science teacher, is leading a Super Science Sunday, fun experimental time with K through 5 grade school kids. We ask that you silence your phones so we can all enjoy the conversation with Dr. Osterholm. And so now, on with the show. We welcome Michael Osterholm, PhD, MPH, a Regents Professor, McKnight Presidential Endowed Chair in Public Health, the Director of the Center for Infectious Disease Research and Policy called CIDRAP, Distinguished Teaching Professor in the Division of Environmental Health Sciences, School of Public Health, a Professor in the Technological Leadership Institute, College of Science and Engineering, and an Adjunct Professor in the Medical School, all at the University of Minnesota. In early 2025, Dr. Osterholm and colleagues founded the Vaccine Integrity Project, a key initiative dedicated to safeguarding vaccine use in the U.S. He is the author of the new book, The Big One: How We Must Prepare for Future Deadly Pandemics. In November 2020, Dr. Osterholm was appointed to President-elect Joe Biden's COVID-19 Transition Advisory Board. From June 2018 through May 2019, he served as a science envoy for health security on behalf of the U.S. Department of Staff. He is also on the Luther College Board of Regents. And this is just part of his resume. You should see the rest of it that I've sent. I would be here all night if I read everything that Dr. Osterholm has done. Also, Dr. Osterholm has a weekly podcast that's really, it's well worth your time to listen to. You can find it on YouTube or anywhere you listen to podcasts. Actually, I think it's bi-monthly, twice a month.
Every 2 weeks.
Okay. And just so you know, Dr. Osterholm cannot see the audience, but he can hear you. And he will be able to, however, see the panelists. So I'm going to get started by asking you, Dr. Osterholm, and this is a really big topic, to update us on what is happening at the Centers for Disease Control, National Institutes of Health, and the Department of Health and Human Services, and how the current situation is affecting the delivery of healthcare and medical scientific research, and even your job at the center, and then each of our local panelists will introduce themselves and ask a question of you, starting with Dr. Charity Reynolds. So let's start with answering that big question that I gave to you.
Well, first of all, thank you very, very much for having me. And I regret I can't be there. To give you an idea how my life has been the last year, I have a wonderful, beautiful cabin, year-round cabin on Hungry Jack Lake in the Boundary Waters. I've been there 1/2 day all year. And that was for a fundraiser to help for the Friends of the Boundary Waters, their fundraiser. So it gives you an idea of why I can't be with you tonight. I'm coming off 2 weeks of travel, and I start right back up again tomorrow with travel. So it's not that I wouldn't want to be with you. I love Cloquet. It's kind of my marker as I go up north. When I hit Cloquet, I'm hitting the Northland. Um, Let me just start out and frame the conversation tonight a little bit so that people understand where I come from. I've now been in my job here in Minnesota for 50 years. For all 50 of those years, I was at the University of Minnesota. For 25 of those years, I was also at the State Health Department and did both the university and the State Health Department, serving as state epidemiologist for a number of those years. In addition to that, I've had a role in every presidential administration dating back to Ronald Reagan. I was involved with the HIV/AIDS Commission and its formation in the 1980s. As you noted, in other ones, during the Trump one, I was a science envoy for the State Department. And also during my time at the State Health Department, I served 2 Republican governors, 2 Democratic governors, and 1 independent wrestler. And I can tell you that no one could tell you my partisan politics. My job is to just be a private in the public health army and to do my job. So tonight I will continue to do that. I will call balls and strikes as I see them. And I hope my comments are taken in that light. There's nothing partisan about any of this. Public health in of itself is all about what do we do for the public's health. The other thing I would just say that sitting here on my desk tonight across from me is an electronic picture frame that every 30 seconds a new shot of one of my 6 grandkids or a combination of grandkids goes by. I never have to wonder one moment why I'm doing what I do. A lot of people thought I'd be retired by this time, and I knew that on that night in November that I had to sign up for 4 more years, and I'm here for the duration, and as is our center. Now, in terms of what's happening, um, the night of the election, I went back and reread the parts of Project 2025, the document that was not supposed to be the game plan for this new administration, but in fact it has served that way. And I recognized right away that in fact we were going to be severely challenged in public health, particularly around vaccines. Shortly thereafter, I wrote an op-ed piece in the New York Times in which I said this administration is going to try to take away all of our vaccines, and they will lead that with mis and disinformation, particularly with Mr. Kennedy, if in fact he is in fact approved by the Senate for the Secretary of Health and Human Services. All of that has come true. I said the ACIP, the Advisory Communication Practices, are going to get fired. They all got fired. Replaced basically with people who are anti-vaccine in their approach. And so that's the framework upon which we deal with today. There is no science review as such around the issues that we deal with today. The top people at the CDC today are all political appointees with no scientific background. And so that's what we're dealing with. On top of that, we have the major cuts that have occurred. And those cuts have really been dramatic in terms of public health preparedness. I come from a long line of events around crisis management, having actually for 3 years after 9/11, I split my time between the health department, the university, and serving as a special advisor to Secretary Tommy Thompson at HHS after 9/11 around bioterrorism. I watched what our government can and must do in those situations. Today, for the first time in modern history, there is no one in the White House or in the National Security Council that has any expertise in infectious diseases or biopreparedness. None, 0, zip. That is a vulnerability that I can't even begin to describe. As we'll talk about tonight, the kinds of decisions that are getting made are really at several levels. One, in terms of how we prepare ourselves to be prepared against these infectious agent threats. And let me remind you that as much as we focus today on war and what's happening around the world, which is surely an important topic, and I don't want to minimize it, but let's not forget, more people have died from microbes in the last 100 years than have died from all the wars combined. And so we have a reason to want to be prepared to try to respond and deal with these issues. But for example, if we were to see another influenza pandemic anytime soon, and the pandemic clock is ticking right now, we just don't know what time it is. We could have a new influenza virus emerge tomorrow. Our capability to make vaccine for an influenza pandemic is very limited based on the fact that we're still growing most of the virus we use in our vaccines in embryonated chicken eggs, the same technique we used in the 1950s. That is a slow, laborious, and in many cases, very fragile process. Well, one of the reasons that we have that is because we don't have a faster means of making vaccine. mRNA technology, the technology that brought us the COVID vaccines we have today, is a breakthrough platform technology. It's remarkable, despite what many will say to the contrary. If in fact we could make influenza vaccine with mRNA technology, instead of in the first year being able to only vaccinate about a quarter of the world, we could in the first year vaccinate the entire world. The difference between those two scenarios are millions and millions and millions of deaths. This administration summarily withdrew all $500 million that was going into the research, development, and approval of mRNA vaccines for influenza for no reason given, other than the fact that they don't like mRNA technology for any number of different reasons. That right there is a catastrophic vulnerability that we could have dealt with, and now we're not. When we look at the vaccines themselves and we look at what's happening with ACIP, there has been much misinformation coming out, and I'm sure we'll get into that tonight. We talk about the fact that, well, and the president himself has noted this, that we're pumping kids full of vaccines. Do you realize that today we have, if by the time a child reaches the age of 10, they'll have had 11 immunizations, and that includes flu, for which of those 11 immunizations, it will basically protect them against 15 different diseases. We keep hearing from this administration that we're pumping all of this vaccine into people, and it's basically not safe to do that. Does anybody realize that back when we first used pertussis vaccine, the old full cell pertussis, there were about 3,700 different pieces of sugars or proteins that got carried along into the vaccine production that caused someone to have an antigenic response. 3,700. Today, with all of our vaccines combined, it's 170. We estimate that on a given day, your body can handle hundreds of thousands of antigens just fine. So the idea that this myth continues to be that we're unsafely pumping our kids full of vaccines is just not true. And we could go into what it used to be like before we got into this business. We forget that before vaccine, over 40,000 people a year in this country would be hospitalized for pertussis, 9,000 deaths. The year I was born, there were 52,000 cases of polio in this country. 21,000 resulted in paralytic polio. Even a disease I worked on substantially in the 1980s, Haemophilus influenzae type B disease, was a bacterial infection often seen in very young children, for which we had over 10,000 cases a year in this country, of which over 1,000 kids died, and many of those that survived had long-term hearing loss, etc. I could go through the litany of all the benefits that have occurred from vaccines that we take for granted today because we don't see them. We're not experiencing them. I guarantee you that we would see a very different public response today if, in fact, suddenly we had children in Cloquet developing paralytic polio or dying from measles or the likes. And so the challenges we have today in this administration is the fact that you can't trust it. You can't trust anything it says. And this is a very, very hard thing for me to say. It's kind of like, talking out of school about my family. But in fact, there are still really competent, wonderfully gifted people who work at CDC, but the upper echelon has now basically been totally changed to being political appointees with no experience, and for which they are promoting issues that are just scientifically not sound. And we can go into each of those individually. I'm happy to do that. But I mean, I think at this point, and let me just say, to frame it at the very end, this may sound historical to you. I'm telling you, we have enough information to know on the inside that this is absolutely true. Right now in this country, there are 5 companies that make our childhood vaccines. That's it. When I started in this business, there were 39. And basically, vaccines are not a profit center for pharmaceutical companies. You know, particularly for childhood immunization vaccines, the old ones that have been here forever. We have to make sure we have vaccines. This administration is about to propose very shortly that, in fact, the autism spectrum should be included in the vaccine injury compensation program. This is that special program that was set up several decades ago where there's a tax on every dose of vaccine such that it goes into a pool. And if you have been injured by a vaccine, we want to make sure that we cover you for that. And this system is a much more expedited manner to do that. Well, if you put the autism spectrum in there, I'll guarantee you tomorrow that'll be bankrupt overnight, that system. And then at that point, all the suits fire at the remaining pharmaceutical companies. We've had discussions with them. They will pull out. They cannot financially afford to be in business, to actually have this onslaught of all these suits, even if they're not legitimate. Now I'm talking about, it's not what the recommendations are for a vaccine. Can you even get one? You may think that sounds like it's impossible. It is not. It is not. That's what groups like ours with the Vaccine Integrity Project are taking on right now. How do we stop that kind of process from taking place? And so our children's health is on the line like I could never have imagined. And I think that tonight we'll talk about that more. And that's why I just want to say one last thing. I am so honored to be here with you tonight, to see a group like this come together on a Sunday night, although the Vikings won. You know, it's a remarkable testament to Cloquet and to who you all are. And I just want to, from the bottom of my heart and on behalf of my grandkids, tell you thank you. You're the voices that are going to continue to be very, very important and are taking this issue on. So I'm just calling balls and strikes. I hope that gives you a sense of where I think things are at right now. It surely was unvarnished.
Thank you, I think, for that information. So now we have Dr. Charity Reynolds, who will introduce herself and ask you a question.
Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Osterholm, for being here and signing up for another 4 years on behalf of my children and on behalf of my community. I'm Dr. Charity Reynolds, CMO, Chief Medical Officer of Fond du Lac Community Human Services Division. I'm here in Cloquet. And speaking of childhood immunizations, I want you to talk about, is there any evidence that separating the vaccines like measles, mumps, rubella, or delaying vaccines like hepatitis B is beneficial to children or to the community?
Absolutely. It's a very important question. And please, it's Mike for all you on the panel, okay? Charity, it's Mike, okay? So let me just point out that, again, much of the misinformation, spacing the vaccine doses out in of itself isn't biologically wrong. It's just the fact that it's going to cause a lot more people not to be vaccinated because now you're talking about 5 and 6 visits, for which once was before 1 visit. And as a result of that, we have already seen in countries that have attempted to do something like this, Japan being one of them, the rates of vaccination drop dramatically because people can't keep track of those 15 diseases I talked about. When do they come and get what dose for what? So from that standpoint, it's a bad idea. But it's even more important to know it's an impossible idea because the one manufacturer who makes these childhood vaccines is not going to go back and start making single dose vaccines for any one given vaccine. If they don't have the manufacturing capacity, it would take years to build it back up again, to gear it up. Cost-wise, the investment wouldn't be there. So if in fact that would become a requirement of the ACIP because of what they make for a recommendation, and I'll talk more about this in a moment with our Vaccine Integrity Project, we will fight that tooth and nail because to comply with that recommendation would in fact effectively take vaccines away from kids. Okay, so no, it's not there. And the second part of your question, I'm sorry, you had another part to that?
If it was beneficial to the community.
Yeah. Oh, the hepatitis B. Thank you. That's an important one. You know, I did a lot of work on hepatitis B early in my career, particularly around transmission in healthcare facilities and bloodborne pathogens and such. But one other area that was really dramatic that people didn't realize that the #1 cancer in the world, was hepatocellular carcinoma, cancer of the liver. It wasn't lung cancer. All that came quickly. And why was that happening? Because in many parts of the world, particularly in Asia, the transmission of hepatitis B virus occurred from an infected mom who in many cases asymptomatic at the time and transmitted that virus to the child during the birthing process, not in utero. And the Chinese and other countries, in the populations, put into place routine childhood vaccination. And literally, in 30 years, they've almost eliminated hepatitis B now in the younger cohorts by giving that dose of vaccine. Why we want to do it at birth, meaning a birth dose. Many people say, well, why do I need to get it? I don't have hepatitis B. It doesn't, well, it turns out more people are infected than they realize. And number two is that they slip through the cracks consistently in healthcare settings where we don't have testing readily available, or in fact, the test is even a false negative. And before the recommendation was made, some 15, almost 20 years ago now, to do community-based same day first dose at birth, we've watched the number of cases in kids in age 10 go from around 30,000 cases today to fewer than 200. And it's because of this universal recommendation. Now, I can understand why somebody says, well, I'll never have hepatitis B in my lifetime. I don't need to get it. And they're right. But this is a vaccine that is highly effective, highly safe, very safe. And so the downsides to the parent is virtually nothing for the child. I mean, you're not putting the child at risk, and you now are protecting them should they later on, be exposed. But I think at this point, I don't want to go back to the days of 30,000 kids under age 10, who many went on and developed hepatocellular carcinoma or cirrhosis. And that, I think, is really the challenge we have. So the ACIP is going to take this up supposedly at their December meeting. And I think they're going to make the recommendation that we no longer do universal at birth dosing. And I know it'll be adamantly opposed by AAP, the Academy of Pediatrics, by the OBGYNs, et cetera. And clearly we'll oppose it very much because of the safety factor and the fact we know it works. We can stop transmission to children this way. Does that help answer that?
Thank you so much. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. And next is Dr. Rip. I'll let you introduce yourself.
Hi, Ken Rip, Raider Clinic, Cloquet Memorial Hospital, also the medical director for Carleton County. So as the weather is finally starting to turn a little colder, which is my kind of season, I can see that flu and flu season is coming, and COVID has been sort of trickling here persistently. So can you just give us an update on flu and COVID, and also any advice you have for us providers on how to convince the reluctant person to get their flu and COVID shot?
Yeah, great question. Front of mind for all of us right now. And part of the problem we have is with the shutdown, CDC is not collecting any information right now on routine surveillance. So we've had to try to do it ourselves. We've been involved with a group at Johns Hopkins that is contacting every health department, state health department in the country every week. We're watching wastewater surveillance data, which is where we look for the virus particles in wastewater. And I can tell you that it's been a very quiet year, unusually quiet year, with just now marginal increases occurring in influenza, particularly in places around Wisconsin, Illinois, and Indiana. We've seen some rise there, but it's still very, very low level. The COVID activity has continued to drop from a peak in September, and right now it's probably at the lowest level it's almost been in the entire pandemic. But I surely expect to see that come back up. What is starting to pick up faster is RSV. We're starting to see that now, particularly in the West Coast area, and of course for pregnant women wanting to protect that baby. That this is now the time that we need to be looking at maternal vaccination and or monoclonal antibody treatment. So I would say it's going to likely be not long before we start to see it pick up. We're seeing major activity right now in China, in Australia has been hit very hard, and we're starting to see it in Japan in the Northern Hemisphere. So I think it's just a matter of time. But for now, the message I keep sharing with people is that, and this was studies that we did 15 years ago, influenza vaccines aren't nearly as effective at preventing infection and illness as are, say, the childhood immunizations. But the data are clear and compelling, and we just published in the New England Journal of Medicine last Wednesday our compendium work that we did, looking at all the updated vaccine information for influenza, RSV, and COVID. And we can say with certainty that the protection against serious illness, hospitalizations, and deaths is very substantial. So you don't get the front end of saying, okay, I don't get infected at all, but preventing deaths are there. This is why I have a very easy time saying I recommend this to every child of influenza vaccine as well as COVID. Why? Last year, 285 kids in this country died from flu. 285. And of those, half of them had no risk factors could be identified that would have said that they would have been at risk. Now, that's still a low risk overall, but generally speaking, if you can do something to prevent that, that's just like saying seatbelts aren't worth it because the risk is low overall of ever being an accident. We would never not buckle up our kids. And so I think at this point, to share with your client, your patients, particularly those who are over age 65, who have underlying immune conditions, I think young kids, again, I would urge them to say, this isn't going to keep you necessarily, it might, from getting infected, but boy, it's a safety factor that could really protect you from dying or being seriously ill. So that's my message to them, and if they'll decide if they're going to take it or not. I have mine. I just want to let you know. I just got mine. Okay.
I got mine as well.
Yeah, good.
I-
Sure.
Can I wait? So you're saying that there's information being collected from health departments or
From state health departments,
And
they are still, well, that's at this point, it's not publicly available as such. This group at Johns Hopkins puts out a weekly newsletter, but you have to pay for it.
okay,
We don't. Nothing we do has a paywall, but we'll
Okay.
keep you posted. But right now, I can tell you that, as I said, the activity in the upper Midwest is actually very, very low, but it's surely likely going to increase in the next several weeks.
thank you. Okay, next is Dr. Chris Thiessen, and he's going to introduce himself.
Christopher Thiessen. I work at Gateway Clinic in Moose Lake, and I've worked there 24 years. Mike, my question is, when I take care of a pregnant woman, we have always been taught that the evidence shows that acetaminophen or Tylenol is the safest and the best choice for treating pain or fever. Is there any evidence that shows otherwise?
Well, let me first just point out, did you know that there's actually an association between shark attacks and eating ice cream? If you look, the data are perfectly timed chronologically. Shark attacks and eating ice cream. Now, why is that? Because shark attacks occur in the summer and most people eat more ice cream in the summer, okay? They're not cause and effect at all. Well, the Tylenol data, we worry, has a tremendous amount of relationship to that in fact, the same thing is there. Well, I absolutely say there is no risk with Tylenol for women and then subsequent autism-related activity in their children. I can't. I don't think the data is there at all to say it isn't, but it's surely not there to say that it is. And so when the administration put that out there, it was a shock to many of us. It was very, very poorly done. The data are not at all convincing. So next time somebody asks you about the relationship, tell them about shark attacks and ice cream, okay? And tell them that's the closest that this comes to giving you any sense that there is a relationship. As you pointed out, it's a very important tool to have in our toolkit because we know that fever can be a major challenge in pregnant women, and that in itself is a huge risk factor for any number of things. So to take away Tylenol would be in a short-sighted in many, many ways. So that's why you'll see, the OBGYNs, the ID people, AAP, et cetera, all saying the same thing. No, do not at this point. You obviously you want to use Tylenol wisely as you would anyway in terms of who and when, but to deny that to a woman with fever like that who's pregnant would, I think, be very bad medical advice. But again, you're going to hear it coming out of the administration, okay? because they just go after whatever. They also were the one promoting recently this new paper that came out that if you knew anything about this paper, you go, oh my God, showing circumcision is also associated now with autism. So I mean, pretty soon riding spaceships will be associated with autism. So, and I don't want to minimize the autism issue. It's real, it's important. We have incredibly important data looking at the genetics of this issue and looking at there may be insults together to environmental issues with genetics, but none of the things that we just talked about have any kind of hard conclusive relationship to autism. Good luck. I know it's hard on the front lines.
Thank you. And then I have one other topic to ask about, and that is in the rural areas, what kind of things can we do to help public health?
You know what? You're doing it tonight. I mean, this is an emotional moment for me to be with you because I am so proud of what you're doing. I mean, it's having these kind of discussions. We have to be open and out there. We have to let the public hear these issues as they lay them out. We need to help each other. Today, many people who are not in the medical community wouldn't necessarily know the pressures that people like yourself are under. People who come into your office at one day and put a piece of paper in your desk and say, I'm not going to do this, this, and this, because look what I found. I did my own research, and you have 10 minutes to 15 minutes to have a visit with them, and you're trying to deal with that. It is incredibly challenging. And so I think it's really important that the community understand the best information they can get today is coming from their own local physicians, nurses, public health agencies. That to me is really important, and you got to count on them. And the fact that we're all here having these discussions says you care. You're learning yourself. We're all learning. I said to you before we got on the air earlier, I think I knew more about vaccines related issues 10 years ago than I know now. I'm learning. We're all learning, and that's our job, is to share that with the public. But I can tell you what's coming out of our federal government right now is not based on science. It's based on an ideology, and that's not what public health is about.
Thank you. Next question. Yes. Next question is from Jenny Barta, and I'll let you introduce yourself.
Thank you, Dr. Osterholm. My name is Jenny,
Mike.
and I'm a public health nurse specialist at Carleton County Public Health and Human Services. I work as the infectious disease coordinator there, and I also sit on the Infectious Disease Continuous Improvement Board for the State Community Health Services Advisory Committee. So thank you very much for being here tonight. My question is, what emerging infectious disease or diseases are on your radar right now that we should really be looking out for? And this can be globally, nationally, or even locally here in Minnesota.
Well, Jenny, first of all, before I go on, I have to say I have a special place in my heart for state and local public health, and particularly the community health service agencies. One of the most important accomplishments of my entire career, when I was at the state health department, over the course of my tenure there, I ended up making it to all 87 county courthouses and health department buildings in this state. I saw it all the way from War Road down to Caledonia, from Laverne all the way up to Grand Marais. And, that was one of the most wonderful experiences of my career, was just meeting and being part of the community and learning. I never went on a trip anywhere in the state of Minnesota. I didn't learn more than I knew when I left. So, I mean, it was amazing responsibility. So, well, in terms of answering your questions, I was trying to figure out what time my plane is tomorrow so I can get it done before that plane comes up, okay? Because when you want to know what's going on with infectious disease today, it's really remarkable. Let me take some that you might not think about, and I will get to the ones you probably are thinking about. But right now, I have worried really very, very much about antimicrobial resistance. We are beginning to see the rapid development of additional antibiotic resistance as we continue to use antibiotics in a way that, we need them for clinical practice. Clearly, in many cases, we're using them in excess for what is actually indicated. But this is a normal part of microbial evolution. You put an antibiotic in there, eventually some are going to mutate around whatever the mechanism is that that antibiotic is doing to kill that bug. And we're now beginning to see diseases we cannot treat anymore. We have certain sexually transmitted infections in part of the world right now that are resistant to everything we got. We're seeing that more and more with any number of different pathogens. And so this is one that there isn't an easy answer for, because first of all, what pharmaceutical company you're going to convince to invest potentially $1 billion into bringing a new product forward, but it's a product that we don't want you to use unless you absolutely have to, okay? Don't use it. And so all the motivation is right, but the economics are wrong. And so we're having a hard time right now. We're losing our antibiotics much faster than we're seeing new ones come into play. So I worry that in 10 to 15 years from now, we'll be talking more and more about a emergence of a post-antibiotic era. And that's hard for people to understand or appreciate. And people don't realize that when they come into you, every time they have a cough or a fever, or a child has an ear infection, they don't need an antibiotic, but boy, do they look at you as if somehow you're not giving them good medical practice if in fact you don't give them an antibiotic. And so again, that's one of those bumper issues you have to deal with all the time on the front lines clinical practice. When do I use an antibiotic and why? We have a big problem in the agricultural side. We use antibiotics there very, very widely, and that's a huge challenge. And so that's one. The second area that I would say is we are beginning to see remarkable movements of mosquitoes around the world. And it has to do with two things. One is just global transportation. What's in cargo holds, what's in airplanes, what's in people going from place to place. This past summer was a monumental event. For the first time in the history of Iceland, they now have mosquitoes on the island. They had never had mosquitoes before. They're now there propagating. And we're starting to see mosquitoes that are moving into other areas of the country that had never seen certain species, which now can transmit infectious diseases. I don't think most people realize the Mayo Clinic actually was started as a malaria hospital for Civil War veterans in southern Minnesota, because we actually had a fair amount of malaria in areas here. That mosquito that can carry malaria surely can come back again, despite all we did to eliminate it. We're seeing major spread in West Nile virus. I could go through the laundry list of different infectious agents, mosquito combinations, and part of it has to do with climate change. People can say it's not happening, but it is. And it's one where the range of the mosquitoes are changing and how they overwinter is changing. And so that's another issue. Finally, I think the thing that, of course, I have concerns about is another pandemic. We as a population today at 8 billion people actually have contact with animal reservoirs for these viruses that like we never had before. Bushmeat, the going into the jungles, going at and basically have an interface with these animals. And as a result, we're seeing more and more human related infections with some of these viruses. We've now discovered in both China and Brazil bat species that are carrying coronaviruses that actually have all the same mechanisms to spread like SARS-CoV-2 or COVID, highly infectious, but they also carry the genetic package for killing like MERS and SARS did, the two other coronaviruses we saw since 2003. Both of those killed anywhere from 15 to 35% of the people that got infected, but fortunately they weren't very infectious. Now, if you combine a highly infectious virus and one that can kill like they can kill, that's pretty much a nightmare story. Well, that's a reality. So we need to be better prepared for these things, and vaccines are going to be our future that way. We need to put so much more research into vaccines and move those. And right now, as I started out with this whole presentation about the fact that microbes kill more people than all the weapons in the world, we need to be investing aircraft carrier-like investments in vaccine work, et cetera, that can really help us be prepared. And frankly, vaccines could have a huge impact on antimicrobial resistance. Imagine if we didn't have to deal with drug-resistant pneumonias and so forth because people actually had on board vaccines. Staph aureus vaccines. I could go through a laundry list of things that wouldn't that be great if we didn't have to deal with them as challenges. So that's a lot to think about. But one of the things I'll say, if you're involved with infectious diseases, you may be on furlough, you may not get paid, but by God, it's a hell of a market right now for infectious disease people out there dealing with all these issues.
Thank you. Jenny, you want to go ahead?
Yes, and with that, I do have a follow-up question for you. So for our state public health department as well as local public health department, with decreasing financial resources, what would you suggest that we focus our attention on infectious disease-wise?
Well, actually, I happen to be pretty deeply involved with that very topic right now. It turns out that the Council of State and Territorial Epidemiologists, which is all the state epidemiologists in the country, have put forward a proposal that has been presented to a group of foundations for possible funding, which would actually help support state and local public health in lieu of what might likely be the future for funding. Most people are not aware of the fact that the vast majority of states in this country, their entirety for funding for infectious disease work is covered through CDC. Minnesota, 94% of all the budget that we have for infectious disease at the local and state level is money coming directly from CDC, which we know is at risk right now. So, we could see not only a major impact on federal assets for infectious disease work, but also for state and local health. So I'm helping with this proposal to move it through. It's part of what some of the things we're doing now with the Vaccine Integrity Project, and to try to provide that kind of backup so that states would have access to this. They would have access to experts who could go from one state to another to help out, kind of a mutual aid pact. And so this is a huge issue. I'm glad you raised it. I don't want to wake up one day and find out that all these cuts have occurred and we don't have anything to replace it. That would be, it's like, having a 911 number, but nobody answers the phone. That would be a huge challenge.
Thank you. Do the panelists, anybody have another question, Dr. Rip?
I'm going to throw one at you, Mike, is the cut to USAID and how that is going to influence global health and eventually U.S. health.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. That's a huge issue. Let me just say that, and this is somewhat of an emotional issue for me. I was very, very involved with HIV/AIDS in the earliest days. And worked closely with a number of people. I watched our entire community with hemophilia die from HIV over a period of 18 to 24 months. A number of individuals I worked closely with who were gay men. My own aunt, a Catholic nun from California, who tripped over second base playing with her grade school class, broke her hip, had surgery, had a half a unit of blood. Turned out it was HIV infected, and she was one of the first people from blood transfusion to die from HIV. I watched when my family would not go see her in California out of fear of HIV contagion. At some weeks, I went to up to 5 funerals a week in Minnesota here from people with HIV, and I never thought I'd see that again. When the retroviral drugs came into existence, it was like, oh my God, we'll never see that kind of plague again. Well, then along comes PEPFAR, George Bush's pet program, which was remarkable. It not only was able to bring to the low-income countries of the world these retroviral drugs, but it brought the systems to actually get the drugs out. The motorcycle mothers, who literally had a route every day in their villages to take into, a direct observed therapy of drugs given out. At pennies a day, we're talking less than $1 a day. And we arrested HIV transmission from infected mom to child, just like the hepatitis B issue. But for many adults, were living happy, healthy lives with, real economic contributions to the community. In addition to that, PEPFAR helped make sure that water supplies were safe. They provided malaria bed nets. They did a lot of work on malaria control. That is all gone. And you know what? 5 funerals a day is going to seem like a nice, not too bad of a time as things finally emerge. There's at least 31 million people who are likely going to be severely impacted over the next several years with HIV, that we had, for pennies a day, kept them from having that happen. It is absolutely a tragedy, a tragedy. And I know history will go back and look at this and saying, how could you have done that? And so your point is just so well taken. And if I sound emotional, I am, because this to me is absolutely just ethically as wrong as anything could ever be wrong. And we're going to watch. These were countries that, because of our soft power diplomacy, by going in and using vaccines, safe water, maternal clinics, etc., we ended up basically having such support and such a relationship with these countries that we didn't need bombs or bullets to have a relationship. And now that soft diplomacy has been totally erased. It boggles my mind. So I don't have an answer for it other than to say, what a tragedy.
I have a question about immune amnesia. I've heard that term in relation to measles and COVID, and I was wondering if you could help explain it to us.
Yeah, well, there's a lot more work to do on this, but particularly with measles, it can basically, because of what the measles virus does, it impacts on your immune cells in such a way that it basically causes those immune cells not to react to other antigens that they previously had encountered. So in other words, it would minimize the previous protection you had from selected other infectious diseases. It's still a little unclear just how much that happens or for which kind of T cell, B cell combinations it occurs with, but it's something that's real. I mean, there is clear evidence that, particularly with measles, I mean, I've heard it about COVID, but I've not seen the data to support COVID, that can happen. And so this would add additional reasons why you want to be vaccinated for measles. You don't want to get infected because you don't want to have an immune amnesia event where what you were otherwise previously protected by or for no longer is operative. But stay tuned, because there's going to be a lot more research coming out on that, I think, in the next 12 to 18 months.
Any other questions from the panelists?
Can I ask the panelists a question?
Sure. Yes.
What is your biggest challenge right now in dealing with vaccines in your clinic? And what can people like myself and others do to be helpful?
I think emotionally for me, the biggest challenge is unimmunized or under immunized children. I trained prior to HIB and the HIB vaccine, and I remember the peds ward in 5, 6 kids whose brains were mush from meningitis and doing a lot of spinal taps. And when I finished my residency, I didn't have to see that anymore. And the idea of going back to that is scary. And there's nothing worse than a sick child. They didn't do anything to deserve it. And so I really have a, that's one thing I struggle with. And so I try and convince the parents empathetically. And what also is hard is when you have one parent who wants the kid vaccinated and the other parent doesn't. And that gets dicey. So.
And then, you get to be in the middle of all of it. Just to add some definition to your Haemophilus point you just raised, which is really an important one, is the fact that in Minnesota, before the vaccine arrived, 1 out of every 250 kids before they reached the age of 5 would have had an invasive Hib infection. 1 out of 250. That's high. I mean, people, I think they start to, oh my gosh, and so I think that you're a wonderful example of a memory that, thank God, is no longer there, but could be again. And you can provide the testament to what you saw, how horrible those cases were. And so I appreciate that. I hope parents listen to you for that reason alone. You know what you're talking about.
Hi, Mike.
Hi.
I'm going to take the opportunity to give kudos to our Fond du Lac team. So we have a great division, nurses, providers, medical staff. I looked up our Minnesota immunization childhood numbers and statistics, and we are the state's average for childhood immunizations.
Congratulations. Well done. Now, I say this with a smile and encouragement. We got to keep those numbers up. That's what I worry about, is how they might slip in the future. And this is one of the things about our job. Our job is never done. You know, if 65,000 new kids are born in this state every year, that's 65,000 kids that we need to make sure get vaccinated, because if we go 1 or 2 years where we don't, that number builds up quickly if we're unvaccinated. And so our job is never done. And I think that's a great challenge. But the fact that you're where you're at right now, bravo, bravo, bravo.
Yes, our team is amazing. Our division, they work really hard.
Dr. Osterholm, this is Jenny Barta from Carleton County Public Health, and
Mike, please.
oh, Mike, thank you. I just also want to echo what Dr. Reynolds has just said. I work closely with Fond du Lac Public Health and with the amazing team there. And I actually have some very fond memories during the COVID pandemic of partnering with Fond du Lac in our vaccine events, particularly when the COVID vaccine became available for children. So we worked together to make what could be a very scary and challenging time be hopeful. We brought some hope to families to help bring them, out of the pandemic and hope to bring families back together again after being apart for so many months. So I agree. I'm very appreciative for Fond du Lac and the services that they provide. What really concerns me from the public health perspective is the differing advice that is being given from the ACIP, from the Center for Disease Control. For so many years, the CDC was basically our gold standard. They were the entity that we looked to for guidance and for direction, for protocols, for policies, and also, as you had mentioned, for funding sources. And now it seems like everything is up in the air and untrustworthy. So if you have any guidance for us, because we treat the community as a whole, not individual patients particularly, but if you have any advice for us in public health as to where we can go to for good sound advice. I mean, besides CIDRAP, of course.
Thank you. Well, first of all, let me just say that your observation on CDC is exactly right on the mark, as is FDA. And that's incredibly hard for me to say, as I said earlier. Our goal with what we're doing with the Vaccine Integrity Project, which I'll mention just in a moment, is to one day restore CDC and ACIP back to its days of glory. And then we're going to get out of the way again, okay? So what we did is, recognizing that this was going to be a challenge, we received funding from a foundation to embark on this work, so no conflicts of interest. And the first thing we did is 6 major focus groups involving everyone from the basic research and development of vaccines to the final administration in the arm, okay? And said, what are the things that, given a compromised CDC activity, ACIP, what can we do? And we came up with 8 different topic areas. We took up 3 of them, and the most important one was very time sensitive, was the fact that there was not going to be any ACIP recommendations coming out based on any science this year for the fall vaccine recommendations for COVID, influenza, and RSV. And so we embarked upon 26 investigators through our project, literally working 28 hours a day in 3 months, did a 1-year review, meaning what would have taken 1 year normally, review of everything that had been published on those vaccines since the last time ACIP met. And we submitted to the New England Journal of Medicine that manuscript last Wednesday, but we had been providing data to the medical societies all along. In fact, we had an open meeting in which we shared a lot of our data in August. That paper was over 230 pages long. It was that comprehensive. What got published in the journal is the manuscript of 28 pages, and then the rest is in the appendix. And it was what as I said, medical societies used as the basis, which was really important, but even more important was AHIP, the overall umbrella organization for payment, agreed that what they had in the past tied their recommendations to as ACIP recommendations. But they were willing to accept our data, our base information, as another alternative authoritative source so that in fact we could also assure not only were the vaccines going to be recommended, but that they be paid for. And so that's one of the things that we've done at the vaccine center. We're taking on hepatitis B right now. We're also taking on the seasonal vaccines for next fall, a year from now, in a much more comprehensive way. And we're looking at other vaccine issues as to take that on. We want you to know that these surely can be used as authoritative sources of information, but that our job is to work ourselves out of a job, and that we don't want or need to do that in the future. So I'd say the Integrity Project right now, which is on our website, has all that information. In terms of states, Minnesota is a state you can trust the health department's website, but there are a number of states you can't. I mean, the state of Louisiana had a major pertussis outbreak going on for 3 months, including deaths in kids, and never alerted anybody. And in fact, at that time, backed off their recommendations for routine childhood immunization. It was only because a news media source picked it up in April that actually it ever saw the light of day. You would not want to trust the Louisiana Department of Health's website, okay? So one of the problems we have is even red state, blue state issues of what will be shared by state health departments. So I think right now, I would say the medical societies are really important. Follow their leads. I would say number two, you can use our site. You know, we're trying to reflect what I think is in fact at the medical societies, and we're working closely with them all the way, by the way, very closely. And I think that you know, some selected health departments, Minnesota being one, you can still use. But generally speaking, you have to be very careful today because there, again, is just so much mis and disinformation coming out. By the way, I might add, a lot of doctors the last week have contacted us because patients are bringing in the new recommendations from the Florida Department of Health that all mandated vaccines end. And they're using that to say, see, well, why would Florida say this if it's not true? You know, it's another problem.
Chris, you have,
If they still have the same director of public health, I recognize that that is awful.
Yeah, it is.
any further questions either from Mike or the panelists? Or, oh, Jenny.
I could ask one follow-up, and you may not know the answer to this, but you said that this committee is working on making recommendations and assuring payment for vaccinations. Do you know if that would also extend to the VFC program? That's the Vaccines for Children program, or is that?
I know it well, and we are working on that very issue right now. There's actually a consortium of states in the Northeast led by Massachusetts, and we're actually involved with that. And should, in fact, VFC actually be challenged, we are working on a backup system that would cover the country.
Okay.
So those are the kinds of things exactly we're working on. And that's a really important question because, as you know, VFC now accounts for over 50% of all the childhood vaccinations in this country. That would be devastating to lose that. So, you know, again, failure is not an option here. We got to figure out how to deal with it.
Well, okay. So do you have some closing remarks?
You know, all I can say is, again, thank you to the panel. Thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for, on a Sunday night, being willing to see the community. Thank you to the people who showed up tonight. You know, we need informed people. You know, this may be at school boards. This may be at any number of different public venues where this issue about vaccines come up. And, you know, our job should be very clear and compelling. Tell the truth. Just tell the truth. And to not do that right now puts so many kids' lives in jeopardy. I mean, think about a day where you had to worry about whether your grandchild was going to develop polio before they reached the age of 5. You know, you had to worry about a son or a daughter having a meningitis case that resulted in, you know, hearing loss for the rest of their lives. And these are not, you know, far off, crazy kinds of science fiction. This is what our history was. This is what we've been through. This is what will return if we find us, you know, pushing against vaccines. Now, I do want to say that, you know, if you look, there still is a large segment of the population that does support vaccination. And we want to help support them in their relationships with their friends, their neighbors, whatever. And I think that's still an important point to remember. It's not as if the whole world has just gone off the edge of the earth, okay? It is, but we need to help these people also in our communities. And so just stay involved, continue to seek out information. And you're awful lucky in your communities to have 4 public health and physician members here who are here tonight. That's what we need in the communities. You're ground zero. I get to come home and leave right away. You have to stay there.
Right. So from a personal point of view, I would say I am old enough to be one of the kids who got the polio vaccine in school. I suppose maybe some people opted out, but I can remember everybody sitting on a chair, or sitting lined up outside of the gym. And I think we got the oral dose and maybe a shot at the time. I'm not sure how many we got, but I'm sure that saved lives and kept many people from getting polio. And the second thing I would say is, as a former retired speech pathologist, and I know there's one other of me in this group and some special ed folks, I worked with, when I worked in the St. Paul schools, with several children who were deaf and blind because their mothers had rubella pregnancy. So that was real. And now we're not seeing that.
Yep. And then, we used to have over 50,000 cases of rubella a year in this country. Think of that. That was just tragic. That involved over 15,000 deaths a year. That's what, people don't understand or realize what, our parents and grandparents went through trying to raise us. And that's what we don't want to have to repeat again for the public to see that. We surely, that'll be a huge, huge challenge for all of us if it's going to take widespread outbreaks to finally get people to understand why this is important.
That's a sad state of affairs.
Yeah. But remember, it's for our grandkids. We'll keep doing it, okay?
Yes. Well, we can't thank you enough for giving up your time on a Sunday evening, and it sounds like you're getting ready to travel again, so I'm sure you need to pack your suitcase or whatever you're going to do to get ready, and it's precious time that you gave to us tonight to answer questions and to even ask some questions, and we thank you so much for that.
But I can't wait to drive by Cloquet on the way to the gunflint. I just have to make that happen. Thank you.
They thought you were great, apparently. Nice applause.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for being there. Okay.
Be well.
I think you're disappearing. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. And I don't know if there are any last remarks from the panelists. If not, I think maybe we are done. And I thank you all for coming on this blustery kind of cold night.
Is there any audience?
Do we have any particular questions from the audience? Is anybody? And we do have a question. Okay, go ahead. You're going to ask it of the panelists. So the question was whether the Indian Health Service would fund, I just want to make sure the audience heard, Indian Health Service will continue to fund vaccines.
So, that was really loud. As enrollees of tribes, and if in the service area, they could be seen at Fond du Lac. And if you remember, we're back to COVID, a lot of the tribes first to get the COVID vaccine, they fought really hard at Washington, D.C. to be able to do that. They urged IHS to be able to do that as well. So we are very mindful of that. The community, the Fond du Lac and other bands and tribes know what it's like to die of disease that was brought, right? Smallpox and many others. So it's one of the things that we fight for is vaccinations to protect our communities. So we have great leaders at the Human Services Division that are always in contact with the government, with IHS, making sure that their rights to healthcare are being given to them. So yes. I'm saying that we're on top of it.
Yay.
Thank you.
We do have a microphone here if there. Oh, anybody else have a question of the panelists? I don't know if I see anybody who has a question, right? No? Okay. Well, again, I thank you all for coming. Drive safely, stay healthy. And this will be, has been recorded, correct, Raleigh? Recorded, and Cloquet Indivisible does have a YouTube site. And so if you want to share it with friends or go back and look again, you can find it on the Cloquet Indivisible YouTube site. I'm not sure how quickly it will get up there, but it will be something that you can share with friends. So thank you again for coming.